Hi guys, it's your boy P, WSDC New Nations. I'm obviously working with a whole lot of cool people. We're gonna have Coach Andy Hume. We've seen a bit of him. We're also gonna have Amira returning, but today it's just me. We're gonna be discussing burdens of proof and getting our hand on these things because they often come up in debates. So then, very quickly, a burden of proof is what you have to prove in order to win a debate. But I think the trick here is to make sure that you know what your burdens are so that you know what you have to prove and what you do not have to prove in winning a debate. Often it becomes what is logically required of you based on the nature of a motion. So what you guys have to consider and prioritize when considering a burden of proof is one, what is logically necessary, but also two, then what is important in this debate. So for instance, if it was a debate about banning homework, you need to show the difference your ban is going to make into the education of children, because what is important is children. But equally so, it is also important and logical to show that your policy is going to make a difference there. So yeah, that's it about the first beginning of understanding burdens. Okay, we're back. Explicit burdens. So explicit burdens is what you're going to have to consider, as I sort of like alluded to in the previous sort of like paragraph, is that explicit burdens are those burdens that you are going to most likely consider as the burden you need to prove to win. These are burdens that you are often going to get pushed on in the debates. These are the burdens that are often going to be raised when you are speaking. So when you think about an explicit burden, it's the one that is most intuitive and that comes most obvious to you. Consider this for a second. Let's go back to banning homework. If the motion is to ban homework, the explicit burden is that banning homework is going to make a difference in the lives of or the education of the children that are affected by your policy. So it's always about who it affects, but it's also most likely the most obvious burden that you are going to be called on by the team you are debating against to prove. We're going to discuss shortly then what we refer to as implicit burdens, and they have various other cool applications. Cool. Okay guys, let's talk quickly about implicit burdens. Implicit burdens are burdens that are perhaps not as obvious as the more intuitive explicit burdens. So often, implicit burdens can be thought of burdens that are more holistic, burdens that encompass the entire debate. So for instance, in the motion, this House would ban homework, you would think of what are the problems associated with homework, and therefore given that, then you have to prove that kind of problem, and in most cases, you would do that in an argument. Similarly then, with any motion, you have to justify it. So why is it fair or why is it just for us to make this specific limitation to teachers? These are arguments you have to engage with generally in this debate. And this second type is another way to consider an implicit burden because they are not as intuitive to the motions. So then, let's consider what we're going to term and call the 3.2 burden principle. So, 3 burden principles that we have to consider. Firstly, prove a harm. Secondly, prove a justifiable or legitimate solution. And then lastly, prove your solution is going to have an effect. And please note that proving your solution is going to have an effect is pretty much the same as the explicit burden, but let's get straight to it. So, proving a harm. So, when you are proving a harm, you are basically proving a problem. This is that which warrants our policy to be implemented. So, when you consider a motion that says this House would ban homework, you would be proving the problem of homework. Similarly then, and this is moving on to the second burden, which is proving a justifiable solution. A justifiable solution is arguments that go on to say that we can justify this policy either because there are other instances where government makes a similar limitation, or the fact that perhaps that it is only fair and just on the children. So there are various ways to justify a policy, and the second part of a burden is to consider whether or not this policy is ethically just. And then the last bit of this 3-point burden is basically to prove that your policy is effective. So in other words, will your policy solve the problem that you set out to solve? So in other words, will you improve education if you necessarily implement this policy of yours? And that does it for implicit burdens. Check out the exercise on your notes. Check out the different examples that are also provided on your notes. But that's it. Burdens are important. Please note that the 3 burden principle can also help you make a case and build a case for debating, but it was discussed and will be discussed in future. Peace.